Today, I want to explore what's on the other side. You may have heard that everything you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. That anything worth doing requires pushing through a barrier. And while that is true, to some degree, fundamentally, you have no sides. Or you might think of it this way, you are on both sides. And we often don't see through the perceived barrier. So what's on the other side of fear? What's on the other side of death? What's on the other side of achievement? The same. It's a hard pill to swallow. But it's ultimately a liberating one because you understand the design feature of pain and suffering. And that to eliminate pain and suffering would make the whole thing fall apart. So I hope you'll stick around as we explore what I'm calling the so-called other side. I think if we dive into the concept of death, and if you contemplate it with more depth, you'll come to some strange conclusion that you can't die. Not in the sense of being an ultimate finality, because the universe doesn't seem to have that. And that death has already been overcome. I'm not talking about Jesus Christ or anybody who claims to have come back from the dead. That seems a bit strange, doesn't it, to come back from the dead when you've already been there, you see. Everybody has already been there if there is a so-called death. Well, how could you say something like that? In the world of duality, to know that you're alive would be to have implicitly not known that you've been dead in some strange way. It's almost like not being able to answer the question, are you sleeping? If you could answer the question, are you sleeping, then you are not sleeping. But clearly, when you have slept, you remember it. You feel refreshed. So there's an aftertaste to sleep. You know you were asleep. Therefore, you know that you are awake. And in that same parallel, you know you are alive because somehow you have already been and will die. So you've already experienced what we call aliveness and what we call death. You've already been through it. And somehow you have been able to keep yourself from knowing that logically. And you know it in a deeper, intimate knowledge of your own inner working. And that you are afraid of something that is inevitable. Physical, so-called physical death. Now that's a mouthful to describe the metaphor of overcoming, or what we would call transcendence. Some people have transcended their fear of death, which is weird because you know you're going to die. So what is this reluctance, this inhibition? You want to explore that because it applies to so many things in our lives that we avoid because it seems to hurt. And while we are compassionate creatures, and in a sense we want to alleviate suffering, that's a very admirable thing. We have to understand there may not be anything in the universe that we can alleviate without the whole thing crumbling. One could say we could do without suffering, but it is the very nature of suffering which awakens us to the false notion of the separate self. But the separate self is a necessary component. So can we eliminate the ego? Of course not. You're kind of stuck no matter what. And this revelation is an inner one. But it is a principle that helps you understand the linear mind thinking that there are two sides and you got to take sides. And you have these strange sensations that time is on your side. Or that you'll get to the so-called other side. But in looking more carefully at the universe, the so-called other side of the rainbow is simply just a strange way of cutting a circle in half. A rainbow is a circle. Death is a circle. So everything in life is spherical, circular, complete. And in our way of looking at the world, we are seeing things segmentedly, perceiving there to be drop-offs and cliffs and boundaries and straight lines and 90-degree angles. And it just doesn't work that way. But it doesn't mean you don't stop desiring and achieving. It's just that you understand, dare I say, the necessity of pain. And the beautiful reward that comes with endurance and the tolerance of that pain and the overcoming of the pain. And if you avoid pain, if you avoid movement, if you avoid action, you start hurting. You become sedentary, and that creates pain. So you are damned if you do and you damned if you don't. That means that is a metaphor for you are on both sides of this. So the quest is to dial in the right amount and choose it consciously. Just like a bodybuilder. Right now I'm going through a body transformation. I am wanting to build muscle. I am wanting to create a more athletic and vibrant body that can lift weights and do things. But it never ever becomes easier. It becomes more technical. And so everybody in a gym is consciously pushing through pain. Now there is a tolerance limit, but every day you are stretching. So you might think of this as stretching boundaries, expanding in imagination, broadening your horizons, lifting your limits. If you can do all of those things, metaphorically speaking, if you listen to your language, everything you want is on the other side of fear. Learn how to stretch or push through the pain, dial in just enough so that you can endure it. And the so-called payoff is a strong muscle. And so, what is this avoidance of death? The avoidance of pain and suffering. The avoidance of being seen, heard, and recognized. If you are the creator of the universe, and I'm not saying you are or aren't, why do you not want to be recognized, yet secretly do? Do you see that? There's a wonderful paradox where this strange phenomenon of duality has a secret evil twin. You want to be recognized, but you want to be anonymous. And you are recognizable and anonymous at the same time. It's like the world's greatest hidden secret, shrouded in plain sight. And so you have this living paradox of the so-called other side, which would be the paradise. And see, P-A-R-A is an important prefix in paradise, parable, paradox, parallel. P-A-R-A means side by side. And so we think when we die, we're going to be in paradise. But the mind is like thinking of the afterlife as more of this life. And so we paint the picture of being in heaven and standing around the throne of God, singing, "Praise ye the Lord, the Almighty." That is until you get sort of tired of doing that. And you're wondering what the hell they're doing in hell. And I'd like to do some of that. Gamble, smoke, drink, carry on, fornicate. And the people in hell are getting bored of being hot all the time and wondering what the people in heaven are doing. So there's just this constant duality in our image of the so-called afterlife. So there is no other side. You can catch on to this illusion, but you can't necessarily expose it to someone who believes themselves to be a separate entity. But you can transcend this strange thing. you can transcend the idea of death as being a final curtain call, or a final curtain, like lights out. Again, you can't, there's no lights out without lights on. And there's no lights on without lights off. And this on-off oscillation would imply that you are a wave, not a particle, or a wavicle, or both at the same time. And we know that energy and matter are the same. And energy is simply just, or matter is simply just energy slowed down enough to be perceived as a solid object, but it is still moving. And that's where this illusion breaks down. That there is nothing really solid in the universe. It's just slowed down enough to be perceived as solidification. So, you have to understand the premise of the so-called other side, and that you live in a proliferation of yourself, or an infestation of yourself. Once you think you've built yourself some kind of protective barrier, the so-called enemy grows from within. You can't avoid yourself. You can't overcome yourself. You cannot outsmart yourself. People will also say, just be yourself. Okay. Try to do that. And then try not to be yourself. Somehow, we want to see what inauthenticity is. That's a big word in spiritual teaching, is to be authentic. It's another dual term. Then you want to start exploring what inauthenticity is, and how unaware humans are of their falseness, which is the ego, which ironically contains the truth. You will never be able to separate truth from false, in the same way that you will ever be able to separate yourself from death, because you are dying. But death somehow doesn't seem to be a permanent off. Permanency seems to belong to on, which is awareness. Yeah, can you turn off awareness? Well, in a way you can, and it's called sleep. But we have a vague recollection of having been asleep. And so you have a vague recollection of being dead. Works the same way. Otherwise you wouldn't know you're alive. Do you see how it works? And pain is part of that. You wouldn't know that you were alive without pain. Some form of it. And then when you consciously choose to endure, you see the goodies. You see that you can push the so-called boundaries. And they're illusory. And that's where growth and evolution have their being, in the perception of some kind of limit. But that limit is also you. But you have to deeply, deeply contemplate your existence. You have to deeply contemplate death. Deeply contemplate what seems to be opposing you. That's when you have a V8 and you realize, oh wow, it's a design feature. All of these things are design features which can't be removed, added to, changed. On a superficial level, yeah. But you might consider it a controlled experiment. Deeply, you want to be recognized. But you can't be recognizable without there being some hidden anonymity. How do we recognize the anonymous presence? The impersonal I am. If you couldn't recognize the impersonal, anonymous I am, you would not be able to recognize the I am not and the personal, the little ego that seems to be living in the body, that we greet each other on the street. You see? So what's on the other side is more of the same. Rainbows are circles. You have no sides. And the perceived side, in the physical world, you are always on both sides. That's why we love our enemies. We do good to those who harm us, because we understand. And I hope that my channel has helped you understand and to be a part of a knowledge which transcends logic. Please check out my blog, mymorningmotivator.com, or one of my books on Amazon. I have a new book coming out. It's called The Honest Morning, and I think you'll enjoy it. And thank you for watching.